Thank you. I'd first like to just say thanks to the Clinton School for having me here. Thank you, Dean Rutherford and Nikolai, both for the invitation and all the coordination. Also, just thank each one of you in the crowd for coming tonight. It's really an honor to speak before you. I want to start with a question. How many of y'all were here last night? Okay, I see a few hands. And how many of you are Arkansas Razorback fans? A lot more hands. Well, Jeff Paston was here last night talking about the need for a playoff system in college football. And I just have to say that I'm glad that tonight I'm not going to have to compete with the excitement and the debate around his talk. But it's truly an honor to be here. Looking at the list of past speakers is both very humbling and overwhelming, but also a huge honor. So tonight, I'm going to talk about poverty. I'm going to talk about potential, the potential that exists in the developing world. I'm going to talk about empowerment, Ni Solo, the shoe company that I've started with a team of great business partners, and also the role that you can play. And to start talking about poverty, I think that you first, or poverty alleviation efforts for that matter, you have to start at the very basis of defining what is poverty. What are our ideas of what poverty looks like? What are the causes behind it? And what can we do about it? And having a lot of these conversations in the past, I want to point out a few misconceptions that I really feel like are doing our country and just aid development around the world an injustice. And one of those, and let me just start by saying I know that I'm preaching to the choir. I know a lot of you are Clinton School students. I saw your book list in the back, or I saw Banker to the Poor, a few other Aid Watcher books, and so you should know some of the stuff that I'm talking about. And I know that if you're here tonight, you're probably not one of the people that need to hear this message, but the problem is that a lot of people outside those doors don't know, and that we have a message to share as a group with the rest of the United States of what poverty looks like and how it can be alleviated. Now, one of the first misconceptions of poverty, I have to admit, traces back to my childhood and affected me as well, and it was probably most of our first look at what poverty looks like. What is in those visual images that we get. Well, in my experience, when I was about 11 years old, I saw a TV commercial. There was a stereotypical infomercial about poverty. It featured a 7 or 8-year-old boy, very thin in an African country, walking hand in hand with a white male with huge alligator tears in his eyes. And what that did, and I think it did a great thing, those types of commercials definitely promote a lot of awareness. But what it did for me, and I think maybe for many of you, when we see that type of advertisement, is it makes us see the poor as very defeated and also very much in need, and almost we get emotions are evoked inside of us that we feel sorry for the poor. And so all of our actions become wanting to help them from a standpoint where we are here and they are here, and we can help the poor. And that's, I'm going to touch on that in a few minutes. But another one is, especially here around the South, and I'm really quite tired of hearing about it, is that poverty is a direct result of an unwillingness to work or a lack of effort. We hear that all the time. No one takes the time to think about the environment that people grow up in. No one takes the time to think about broken homes. They don't take the time to think about conflict zones in different parts of the world. They don't take time to think about bad governance and those effects. So some of us think they're unwilling to work, and so those thoughts just harbor inside of us and shape the way that we view poverty. And the main problem with this is that our misconceptions, the misconception that we think that the poor are helpless or defeated, or that we need to help them, or that they're lazy, or even worst of all, incapable, that we think, like I just said, that they're helpless. The problem with that is that it begins to shape the ways that we address poverty. Everything becomes about effects. We see a problem, and they're mostly the effects of poverty, and we want to treat those effects. So, for example, we see people in other countries without clothes. We see people in need of wearing shoes. We see a need for water, and we address those as we address the effects of poverty. And so what do? We donate our clothes. We donate our shoes. We donate things. We give food. We give money. And I think that, let me just point out, I definitely think that in the most extreme cases, that is the right thing to do. But in the majority of the world, and this is something that many people don't understand, is that that's not what is needed in developing countries. That's not what's needed among the poor. And just to illustrate that a little bit, I want to give you a stat. 2 billion people in the world without access to clean water and without access to electricity. Where do our minds go? Let's get them water. Let's get them electricity. And the problem with that is, of course, in the sustainability of only addressing effects and not cause. So touching on that, we don't think about the effects that this can have. And we don't think about what occurs as a result of only addressing the effects of poverty, not the causes. Well, for an example, it's estimated, and I got this from Aid Watcher websites, which can sometimes may be a bit inflated, but it still paints the picture. Between 1980 and 2000, the cause of 50% of the increase in unemployment, the cause of that was in Africa, was donations of used clothing items. And what happens is we donate clothes or we donate material things, and it undermines local markets. If you've spent much time in the developing world, you see so much talent potential that exists where people are maybe in rural villages, and what do they have? They have talents with their hands, or they adapt and they become entrepreneurs. Not because they necessarily want to be entrepreneurs, but it's a matter of survival. And so they have these skills, and when we dump clothes and shoes and everything into these communities, we oftentimes undermine markets. Or in terms of a well, we build a well. We hear that they need water, so we build a well. We go to their country and we build a well and leave. And what we don't think about is, again, addressing the effects. There's definitely a need for that, but there's a whole lot more that needs to go into that process. It's about development, it's about working as a community and finding solutions that are sustainable. Stats like the fact that in parts of Ghana, 80% of wells are dysfunctional, or in Malawi, in some areas, 58%. What is that? How does that make us feel? We should be thinking about the fact that it takes a lot more than going and putting a Band-Aid on an issue and walking away from it. It should be very community-oriented. So now, after painting that picture for you, I really know that a lot of you in this room understand these things. But we need to reshape our beliefs as a culture, and also in that it will reshape the way that we do mission work, the way that we do volunteer work, the way that we serve, the way that NGOs and businesses and nonprofits are run. And just to illustrate some of the ways that those misconceptions of defeat and hopelessness, helplessness are not true. I know that if you have spent much time in the developing world, you know these things. But I'd like to paint a picture, and I want to start by sharing a story about a girl I met in 2007 named Fina. I went to Uganda for the first time in 2007 after starting a student organization that raised funds for AIDS orphans in Africa. What we would do is we would fund their school fees and counseling services and uniforms and things of that nature. And when I went to Uganda, I'd spend time visiting with the students both in their schools and in their homes. And this is Fina, and that's me in 2007, and Fina on the right in her classroom. She's about 13, I believe, here. When I went to her house, this was, like I said, something I did while I was there, to also visit with the families. And oftentimes they would give gifts, and most of the time it would be a very interesting gift, such as sugar cane that's too big to carry, or huge pineapples or avocados. One time I was even given a live chicken, and I didn't know what to do with it, and they were more shocked that I wasn't going to go home and cook it in where I was staying. But it was interesting. But on this particular occasion, when I visited Fina's house, something happened that really affected my mind of the way that I view the poor. When I went to Fina's house, and it's a mud brick house and thatched roof, much like you can probably imagine, I walked in her front door, and it was really difficult to find Fina because there were so many children. But they asked if I wanted to sit down. I said, of course, and I sit on a couch that's in the corner of their one-room house, and I see some really nice-looking red cloths over the couch. I think, oh, that's nice, because it had been in other places they did that for decoration. Well, I sit down and sit directly on springs to the point where it actually hurt. And I realized that they had those cloths there because they didn't want to show the springs, but that's what they had in their home. And so I knew that it just began to awaken my eyes to the situation that I was sitting in, even more so than the other students in similar situations. But a few minutes later, as customary in Uganda, they offered some peanuts to eat. And so I ate a couple peanuts and was talking with Fina and basically asked her about her family. I said, tell me about your family. She said, well, my parents died of AIDS. I live with my grandmother. Who are all these children? They're my brothers and sisters and cousins. Well, how many are there here? 8 or 9, I can't remember exactly what she said. Who cares for them? My grandmother. Well, how does she care for them? And goes on to tell me that she makes less than a couple dollars a day, but cares for all these children. So out of all the children in the room, Fina was the only one that was going to school. While I was eating these peanuts, I noticed that these children were just staring at me. And so I offered them the peanuts, and immediately they all pounced on the peanuts, and they went all over the floor, and they scurried around everywhere, eating them as fast as they can. And that's when it hit me. These children were starving, and they were not getting food, and they were not getting the things that they need. And so that's the picture of what's going on in Fina's home. And then she tells me, I don't have a gift to give you, but what I do want to do is sing a song for you in appreciation for the organization you started for funding my education, because I feel so honored to be able to go to school. And she's saying, above all songs, she's saying, great is thy faithfulness. She's saying, all I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. And at that moment, I realized 2 things. Number 1, of course, that she was praising God for this opportunity. But number 2, she was thanking for this opportunity of education. That because of this opportunity, she knew that she would be able to have a very different future than her brothers and sisters. And to this day, Fina is one of the strongest students. She's going to graduate next year, and she wants to be a nurse and go back and care for her community. But that is the kind of hope that exists, that in the midst of that kind of poverty, that's the spirit that she has. And that's, again, also the power that education can have. And then, quite briefly, I want to tell you a quick story about capability. If you've traveled, you've seen the resilience that exists. But I had the opportunity to work in microfinance in Peru for the past year. And one of the clients, I kind of had these experiences, and that experience, a year long of working with impoverished women, helping develop businesses, and just watching them do the work and grow their businesses, again, just reinstated all these ideas. But one particular lady named Clotilde, and I actually was doing an annual report and just had to choose among many, and she was very nice. So I said, tell me your story. When did you start getting loans? She said, well, about 3 years ago. Within her first loan was for $50, and she lives in an extremely poor neighborhood. And with that $50, and she got it because one of her children was very sick, and they couldn't pay for the medicine to help her. So she had to work, and she could no longer just look after her children. And so she came to Synergia, the microfinance organization, and said, I want to get a loan. I want to start a business that sells firewood. And so they said, well, why do you want to sell firewood? And she, on her own, thought of this, well, no, everyone's always going into town to buy firewood. What if I stock up here and sell it? Well, she started selling firewood. Then everybody in her block started selling firewood. And so the market became saturated. She adapted. She bought a plot of land with some of the money that she had made that was very small, and began planting crops and raising animals. And within a matter of 3 years, starting with a loan from $50 and again using profits and growing, she turned that $50 and a few other loans into $8,000 worth of profit. And just to paint that picture for you, that's the same as me giving you $10,000 today, and in 3 years you turning it into $1.6 million. That's the change there, and that just shows you the capability that exists. And when you begin to think that they're helpless and those sorts of thoughts, think of pictures like this, and people out there need to know these types of stories. Then lastly, an unwillingness to work. I'm not even going to address this one because we know it well enough ourselves, but this is just a picture that I think speaks wonders and is definitely worth 1,000 words. Oh, that's Fina with her family, with her brothers and sisters. That's her on the top left. But this next picture, it's a little bit difficult to see, but that is a man who is mowing an entire field with a weed eater. I met him in Central America. His name was Carlos, and that was his job, was mowing fields, but he only had a weed eater. And so all day, every day, he would mow fields. But it just shows you that's the kind of working effort that exists in the developing world. So I say all these things to begin to help reshape our mindsets about poverty. You have your experiences. People need to know about them. People need to know about the stories that the experiences you've had in other countries, and know the face of poverty and who the poor are. And I just want to say that the poor are not helpless. The poor are not hopeless. They're very much capable. And what the poor need more than anything is not our quick Band-Aid, our quick fixes. What the poor need more than anything is to be empowered. And they need access. Just their needs are very similar to what we see here. And again, not always in the most extreme cases, but in general, in the developing world, the need is for empowerment. It's for job creation. It's for education. A lot of the challenges we face as a country today. And so, what is lacking there is access and not ability. And that's something that we need to keep very, very clear in our minds. And just to illustrate that point quickly, Dr. Muhammad Yunus, in his book Banker to the Poor, and he's kind of seen as one of the forefathers of microfinance, compared the poor to a bonsai tree. And I think this is such a good illustration that in a certain pot, the poor will only grow to a certain size, but taking it out of that plot and planted in a new circumstance, they have the capability of growing into a full-size tree. Another one that I've heard in another book says that the poor are like a Ferrari sitting on mud tracks, that it can't go anywhere, but if it were on the right place and on the right track, it really could. And that's the kind of potential that exists in the developing world. Let's see here. And why empowerment? Two reasons. One, it comes down to really being about dignity. It comes down to the sheer fact that it's no longer, if you're empowering individuals, if you're helping them find a job or helping build a business around their home, it's no longer me helping you. You're no longer up here handing things to people. It becomes like this, and people begin to realize that they can do things through their own powers, and with that comes a lot of dignity. And it's something that a lot of our aid efforts completely bypass, and something that we need to continue to think about both abroad and domestically. And also, the other side of the importance of empowerment is sustainability. Just like I said about the wells and all these statistics you see about what clothing donation does. Well, what happens when those clothes wear out? What happens when those shoes wear out? What happens after that? It's that dependency. We need to find solutions that are sustainable, and one of which is trying to empower people and creating. And it's really just a mindset shift. I don't have all the answers. I don't know how to say empower the poor by creating X or Y job. It's just a mindset shift that we need to begin to foster in our culture and in our work. So what does all this have to do with those shoes over there? In order to really address that, I'll just tell you quickly how it all got started. First of all, what we're trying to do with the Knee Solo is to build a brand that illustrates these things, that illustrates the hope, that illustrates the potential you can see in the quality of the shoes that exist in the developing world, and the resilience and the determination that exists in saying this is possible. So how did it all get started? Well, like I said, I went and worked in microfinance, and one of the things that I did was teach business training classes, which I'd follow up on and help the women basically balance their books, things like that inside their home to really get their business organized. And one day when helping a woman who had a small convenience store inside of her home that sold eggs and things of that nature, I heard a lot of background noise, and she noticed my interest and said, do you want to see what's going on around the corner? So we walked around the corner of her house, and on the dirt floor, tin roof home, her husband's sitting there handcrafting a leather dress shoe, and the quality of it was just remarkable. It looked like something that could sell for $400 or $500 here in the States. And so I was just blown away to see that, a shoe like that in the midst of this poverty. But what hurt even more, what was more surprising was to know that he was barely making ends meet. And it was again just that what I'd seen in Uganda, what I'd seen in South America, what all of you know, what you've seen, what you've experienced. So much talent, so much potential, but lacking capital, or lacking a formalized business, or lacking adequate education, lacking good governance, all of these things. And so the talent, the potential is something we need to know that is there, and then begin to seek that out. And so I had this passion to try to help this group of shoemakers. His name was William, by the way, and that's a picture of him handcrafting a shoe in his shop. And that's what his shop looks like. And like I said, it's just the next room over in his house, and you can see the dirt floor, the tin roof. And but all of those come from places like that in these neighborhoods, and it's really remarkable. I want to challenge each one of you to go inside and really put your hand inside of the shoe, and you'll realize just how well they're made and how comfortable they are after this. But of course, like many of you who may be trying to start a business or looking forward to doing that, all the doubts flooded in. I wanted to help these people, but how could it scale? At that point in time, I still get laughed at today because I was talking about making girls' shoes and things like that, and I didn't even know what a wedge was. And I kept calling it a platform, and I still get made fun of. But that's about where my knowledge was of that at the start. But upon further investigation, I found out that in Trujillo alone, it's a city of about 1 million people in northern coastline of Peru, there are some 2,500 small-scale shoe operations going on. The city's been historically known for shoe production, and now they've outcompeted one another, and with a lot of other problems going on, it's just collapsed more or less. And so there's really high unemployment in these areas, and on a very micro level, we're trying to address this and trying to help empower these shoemakers and grow that. But on a much more macro level, our vision is we want to know your stories. We want to know your experiences. I know that there's tons of talent out there that exists. We want to know where it is. We want to help you if you're running something similar. There's so many great brands out there. We want to work together to begin to foster this movement of empowering individuals. But anyway, so in the midst of trying to decide, I saw this. Oh, you can't even see it. But anyway, behind this man, there's a giant red shoe in the avenue of this part of town. That's when I realized everyone here loves shoes. This is really possible. This could scale. Let's do it. And so that's kind of how everything got started. But I was also so encouraged because I see in our country right now this growing movement of conscious consumerism, which Tom Shoes has very much led the way in really working in the hearts of American consumers. And knowing that, I felt okay about starting it. And after a lot of advice from family and friends, and probably a lot of you, I felt like it was worth a shot. But I don't at all want to say that this has been easy, or that this task of trying to focus on empowerment is something that makes things a lot easier. I think it really does the opposite. I think it makes things a lot harder. It's easier to put a Band-Aid on something than it is to really address it at the root and try to work in a very communal way to address the issues going on in communities and try to empower individuals. Just the logistics behind this, a lot of the advice I got was don't start a shoe company, it's too hard, shoes are too difficult, and things of that nature. And now I know why. It has been a whole lot harder than I ever thought it was going to be. Just trying to get shoes into the United States is one task, but trying to get them out of Peru and working through the just mess of what it means to have a formalized business there, or to export, is just a nightmare. And the point I really want to touch on is, I'm sure a lot of you have thought of this. Okay, I see what he's saying, but how would this ever scale? How can this be in other countries? How could this work anywhere else? It's not efficient, and I understand that. It's the opposite of efficiency. Going in and working into these homes is the opposite of efficiency. Scaling a project like this will be very difficult. Growing this brand will be very hard, but it doesn't mean that it's impossible, and it doesn't mean that we've already had some success doing that. And also, about efficiency, I think that we probably all are beginning to feel this way. I really feel like there's a movement going on in our country that's really countercultural and beginning to say, where has all this focus on efficiency, where has all this focus on the bottom line at the end of the day brought our country? From the turn of the 20th century up until now, everything has been about efficiency and the bottom line, and we've really seen the effects of that, especially in the last 5 to 10 years as the economy begins to change and is in crisis, and as it has become so much about the bottom line, large businesses are willing to cut tons of jobs just so that they can get the most out of the least of every worker that they have. And in that, we've really lost the human connection of individuals in business. And it's something that needs addressing. And so I think that I really hope that this brand works as something that fuels that energy that's going on. And also changes the face of the idea of business. Business in our culture today has all of a sudden become the bad guy. We see social, environmental, and even economic problems caused by business, and we're forgetting that there's a lot of opportunities that business can bring that are very positive. And I think one of the coolest things, if maybe the only, about the economic crisis is the innovation that it sparked. You see people around my age who can't find a job, and so they begin to innovate. And people even in businesses, they've lost jobs. Everyone is innovating, and there's a whole field growing of social entrepreneurship that has this very aim: is what can we do as a business to not only pay the bills at the end of the day, but bring something good to the world. And so the lines have begun to blur between nonprofit and for-profit and NGO and private businesses. I see that as a very good thing. Definitely has its growth pains, but overall it's a very good thing that that's happened. And so some of you, especially some of the businessmen and women in the room, may be saying, well, this is really idealistic. I know how hard it is to run a business, and if you aren't focusing on the bottom line, then you're toast. But I just want to comment real quickly on shared value and the idea that doing this, focusing on what good you can bring to society, aside from your customers, doing this is also good for your company. It changes the face of what people think about your business. And also, just to illustrate it through Ni Solo, what you can see is that if you go and hold our shoes, or you put them on a shelf next to a Cole Haan or next to a Johnston & Murphy, or really some great shoes, ours can hang in that league. And if you reach in and feel the insides and really notice the craftsmanship put into them, in some ways it really surpasses that. And so in terms of our price, we can compete. In terms of our quality, we can compete. In terms of the style, and you can be your judge of this, but I think we can compete a little bit. And but there's one thing that we have that they don't have, and that's the social cause behind it. This company is creating jobs in areas with extremely high unemployment and really plagued with dead-end ways of generating income. And then in addition, we're also donating 10% to education, and we understand the importance of that. And so with that cause, all of a sudden, not only can we compete in all these other ways, but we also have that extra kick. And everyone in this room knows who Tom's Shoes is and knows how much they've just blown up. And I really think that a lot of that, well, of course, it's part of the trend. It's America. As consumers, we're demanding more with our purchases. It's such a good thing. What else? What good can I bring to the world through my purchases? And it's really an amazing thought. And quite briefly, because I know that this is running a little long, I want to talk about the ways that Ni Solo in our experience has exemplified some of these things I'm talking about the hope that exists, about the potential, the capability, the resilience. In terms of capability, our shoemakers never had a formal business. The tax system in Peru is one that is quite backward, in that if you make a dozen pairs of shoes and sell them, or you make 1 million pairs of shoes and sell them, you're faced with the same taxes. And they're a lot higher than we have. They pay 40% income tax and 18% sales tax. And so when you factor that in, that's why there's a whole world that exists of informal businesses. And it's very similar in other developing countries. All of these informal businesses, same story with our shoemakers. A lot of them never had a formal business, but we helped take some of the steps to address formalizing their businesses. And then but throughout the process of exporting these shoes, we showed them what was going on, what paperwork needed to be done, in a way so that if we're not around and we something happens to us, it's still sustainable, and they've still learned these skills along the way. And I was so happy to hear about 2 months ago that one of the 4 shoe shops that we're currently working with exported to Ecuador on their own. They had never even had a formal business. And so that's a huge encouragement, but it just shows you that potential that's there. In addition, I want to show you a picture that at first is a little bit disturbing. And this is a picture of William's home. This is the opposite shot of the shoe shop that you saw. And if you look up on the top left, again, it's a little difficult to see. You can see plywood that's been put up. That's where William put a wall up in his house for the first time. Before he received the profits from the shoes that he made for us, that was a tarp, and he's already been able to put that up, which is so exciting. But what's probably catching your attention more than that is the large object that's yellow in the middle of the room. That's a machine that helps improve the quality of the shoes. And right above there, you see a tarp. William was faced with the choice of whether or not to put a roof over his house or to get this machine to try to improve the quality of these shoes. And it just shows you the mindset that's going on of the vision that they have as businessmen and women to grow their business. And at first, it's a little disturbing. When I saw it, I was like, oh man, this is bad. I want to buy William a roof. And so that's immediately going back to that mindset. I want to pay for that. I want to help them. But in doing so, I'm undermining William, and William wants to buy his own roof. William wants to be the one to put that up. He wants to sell shoes. He wants to do that. He wants to use the skills and talents that he has. And so I had to reluctantly push away from that thought and allow him to do this. But it just shows you so many different levels. That's the kind of determination that exists. And luckily, this part of Peru it's a pretty fresh climate, so he's not getting rained on every day. But that's what exists in the developing world. So some closing thoughts. When everyone walks out of this room tonight, I hope that you leave with an understanding and these visions of, wow, $10,000 to $1.6 million, wow, $50 to $8,000, wow, the guy with the weed eater even, that you realize that there's so much potential out there and so much talent that exists, and that we stop as a country trying to just address the effects of poverty and begin to look at some of the causes and try to address avenues through which the poor on their own behalf can empower themselves to change both their own future and that of their families and communities. So I want to end with just our short holiday video. We got to go down to Peru and film, or while I was down there, I had a good friend come in and film for 5 days this project, and we'll have a lot more stories coming soon, but in the meantime, we've only been able to make a holiday video. So through this, I want you to think about the things that I've said. When we walk out, let's go tell America about these things. Let's talk about this potential, share our experiences with the rest of the world, and reshape the way that we serve and do mission work in business, as teachers, as business leaders, as students, as individuals. Let's begin to reshape the way that we address poverty alleviation. Here is the video.
All right, we've got some time for questions. So if anybody would like to ask Patrick a question, please raise your hand. We'll get the microphone to you. Yes, got one right over here. Wait for the microphone.
Sorry.
Got to get you recorded here.
What does Nisolo mean, and what exactly is your cause?
Okay, thank you. That's a good question. Nisolo, first of all, in naming this company, we had a really difficult time because, as I just went on for 40 minutes, there's a lot behind what led to this and what we're trying to allow it to represent. We had shoes made that didn't have labels on them. That's how long we waited before we could finalize the name. And one day, I was riding in the back of a combi, which is a form of public transportation in Trujillo, Peru, just packed in with people, and knew it was time to decide. And I thought, what is at the very essence of what we're trying to do? And I thought back on when I was an undergrad. I studied international studies. On the second floor of the building, there was a poster there that I'll never forget, and it was a globe, a picture of the entire world, and in the typical blue ocean, and in the middle of it was only the United States, and everything else was empty. And at the bottom it said, "We are not alone." And ni solo, that's what it means in Spanish. It means not alone, and technically it means neither alone, and I'll explain why. It's the idea that in the United States, we're not alone. We're not alone as consumers. We're not alone as business leaders. We're not alone as teachers, as students, as individuals. And our decisions in all of those areas have an increasing effect on the rest of the world. Every single day, the world becomes more interconnected, and our choice as consumers, or as volunteers even, can have a very positive or negative impact on the rest of the world, and that we need to remember that we're not alone. And then on the other side of that there's a whole world of talent and potential that exists in the developing world, and that we need to seek that out, that they're also not alone, that there's a market here, that we're a country that we're open for your goods, and we want to support the development of your future. So the brand itself, Ni Solo, Not Alone, is trying to bridge the gap between those two worlds.
Anybody else got a question? Yes, sir.
Other than buying all of our friends' shoes for Christmas and all of our family shoes, how can we help you succeed other than that?
That's a great question, and before I answer it, I'm going to touch on the previous question we had. I realized I didn't address what exactly is our cause. What we're trying to do, as I've illustrated, is just we're trying to create jobs. We're trying to address poverty where it starts and create jobs, and also contribute to education projects. So in this area of Trujillo and in the future, the global vision is to begin to learn more, to partner with organizations like Crochet Kids and Red Sari and Invisible Children's Men Project, and all work together to really fund this, to really fuel this movement of conscious consumerism. And then the 10% towards education is extremely important, just because we as a group, and hopefully understand too, that any sustainable growth starts with the youngest generation. And so we will always, no matter where we work, give 10% back to the areas where the people making our products live. And then how can you help? Well, first, I guess I'll talk to the Clinton School students. Clinton School students, I know you're some very bright-minded individuals who are probably about to ask me some really hard questions, but this whole process is something that has to take place across industry lines. It's something that has to take place working with government policy. How can our government change policy that we can somehow structure and regulate a way for these types of social businesses to receive incentives? But how is that regulated? There's so many tough questions that begin to come in when all of these lines begin to blur between for-profit and nonprofit, and that's something that leaders like each of you have to address. And then also that this, like I said earlier, this is something that doesn't necessarily solve the very extreme cases of poverty, and that's something that's still a huge need. And in order to really get to a place where creating a job or putting children in school can make lasting change, you have to first address needs like adequate health care and sanitation and access to water, but in a very sustainable way that's very community involved.
Yes, you raised a, oh, okay, and then I'll get to you. You raised a question about Tom's shoes. Mm-hmm. How does your model compare with and/or differ from the Tom's model?
I have gotten that question a few times. I want to just start by saying it this way. Tom's Shoes has done something that is so important. I think I touched on this briefly earlier. Tom's Shoes has worked in the hearts of millions of Americans, and they have questioned and begun to throw forth this idea of, as consumers, how can we have a positive impact? And I think for that, anyone involved specifically in retail, but also really in social entrepreneurship in general, should be thankful for that, should be very grateful for what they've done in that fact that they have almost spurred a movement in a lot of ways, and that this wide recognition, this makes a lot more sense. This wouldn't make as much sense if we had started this 5 years ago, or even in other industries. You feel like, oh, social business, what is that? Oh, Tom's Shoes, and you kind of think of it that way. So I'm very grateful for that, and I actually had an opportunity to host Tom's Shoes several times in undergrad through the organization that I started. And so that was a great experience. How do we differ in terms of models? Hopefully I pointed this out a little bit tonight, but Tom's Shoes does something great in some ways in the fact that they go to areas, especially now, they've gotten a lot better at this, where there are a lot of diseases, and so they're providing shoes for children that a lot of these diseases are passed for people that don't have shoes. And that's really great, and we're really, that's something that is an example of an extreme need. There's a disease being caused there, putting shoes is the right answer there. Our model is a little bit different. Our model is one in which, apart from we're not trying to address those extreme areas, trying to take a step back and say, rather than addressing the effects of poverty, again, by donating clothing or shoes or anything like that, we're trying to take a few steps back and try to change our mindsets about it and approach it in a way that can promote empowerment in ways that people can buy their own shoes, or that people can buy their own clothes and really shape their own future through empowerment.
Hillary. Wait just a second. That's okay, Trish. I promise, Hillary, you're next. Okay, Trish.
Sorry, Hillary. Hi, my name's Trish Flanagan. I'm a student here. Thanks for being here. I think your idea is amazing, and I commend you on your work in that direction. My question to you is two-part. What would you say is the real amount of the profits that return to the community versus when you consider the overhead and the customs fees and everything else? And the second question is, how do the jobs that you guys create compare to the jobs that are already there?
Okay, great question. That was probably one of those difficult questions. You should be proud. Trish,
You just set it up. I said they were going to be asking you some tough questions.
yeah, that could be bad. Well, first of all, that's a really good question. Where do profit margins lie and things like that? Well, for our shoemakers, I want to paint a picture of what it looked like before we interacted with them. I don't think I actually explained this, which I should have. William, the guy that was featured in the picture, whose story I continue to refer, that's where it all started. He was able to sell those shoes that he was making that were great a couple times a year. Around Christmas time, there was a big campaign where you could sell a lot of shoes, and also around Mother's Day. If you've been to Latin America a lot, you know that they love Mother's Day, and that's also a really important time for shoes. But the rest of the year, they don't sell many shoes. And like I said, they outcompete one another. They don't have the capital to really produce in bulk, so they make a dozen at a time and kind of go sell them in a local market, or basically just face the fact that there's not a huge demand there. And so that's what we're trying to do, is create that demand and make work a lot more consistent. And in terms of how much do our shoemakers make, on average on the shoes that we have sitting on the table here, shoemakers are paid around $30 per shoe. And so how does that compare to before? The other part of your question, when they sell a shoe that's very similar to these, and our models are a little bit different. They love square-toed. We haven't found this to be quite as popular for our men's dress shoes, but that usually they would make about $10. So really, it's almost triple the profit margin that they would face there. And then your other question was what did it look like before we created these jobs? Well, we're a baby company. We just started, and we need the help of individuals like everybody in this room, also touching back on your question, to help us grow. What we're trying to do is create that demand. And so right now, we're impacting a small group of shoemakers. It's 4 different shoe shops that we chose based on the quality that they had, the needs that they had, and their excitement and sense of community and willingness to work with us and really believe in this idea, because it has to be a very communal effort. There's a lot of variables that take place. But so we're addressing a small group, but the potential is huge. Like I said, there's some 2,500 different operations. That's a lot of unemployment for a collapsing industry in this city. So, and that's just in shoes, but we're talking Peru, we're talking a very poor neighborhood, not Peru average totals as a country, but we're talking very high unemployment rates. And really, I noticed just from working in microfinance, we're trying to help these women get jobs, and then all of a sudden we realize their spouses and people living there, the men don't have jobs, and it's just unemployment is a huge factor in these areas as it is in similar areas around the world.
All right, Hillary.
Hi, I'm Hillary. I'm also a Clinton School student. My question, I guess I have a bunch, but I'll just ask 2. The percentage you say the men and women who make the shoes, are they mostly men or women? That's not my question.
That's a great question.
Oh, that's, okay, go ahead. That wasn't my question.
Okay,
if it
well,
could be.
tell me your question.
Okay, I was just wondering, so they make $30 as opposed to 10. What do you sell them for? What's the percentage there?
You got to get a chance to find out.
I mean, I could go up there, or you could just tell me about it as well. And also, you said there's a lot of shoemakers in Trujillo and in Peru. How do you choose which shoemakers to partner with, and how many people do you partner with on average?
Okay, great. The question that was uninvited. There, primarily it's men, but each shop, and to kind of paint a picture that I guess I'll talk a little bit more about in a second to answer your third question, but they're usually an average of 4 or 5 people working in each shop, and on average there are two women, 2 to 3 depending on the size of the shop, but they take a lot of pride in their work. That was one of the questions when we were down there doing interviews. We wanted to know, what's it like to be a woman in Peru working in a shoe shop? And they take so much pride in the fact that they say the women somos las alistadoras, which is like we're the ones that finish the product, that we look at the shoe and we find out every little thing that's wrong with it and we make sure it's perfect. Women, we like to put our makeup on and get all dressed up and ready to go. We want to make sure that this shoe when it leaves the shop is perfect and ready to go. And also, all kinds of the braiding that goes on with some of the loafers, a lot of the women take care of that. They're not necessarily, for the most part, the ones really hammering the shoes, but there are a lot of women. Now to address your other questions, I think okay, they on average about $30, and we sell them for about an average of, depending on the product. Well, we just got some new ones that are more expensive because they're a lot harder to make, but on average I would say about $75 to $80, and then of course when you factor in the overhead cost of, first of all, well, I'm not getting paid anything, but just the first of all, building a brand, the website, everything like that, and then those are all kind of one-time costs that, of course, we're facing. But transportation has been very difficult, and we're looking for new help there. But my family is laughing at me. But it's expensive to get shoes into the United States for a whole lot of reasons. So there's a whole lot of overhead that takes place there, and so I would probably say on average there's at least $12 tied into $10 to $12 tied into overhead for the shoes. And so then all of a sudden you're looking at, well, that's $42 that we're spending to get the shoe at an average of 80 into the country. Well, then if we ever want to sell, we have to keep our retail prices high. They're not high, they're competitive, but in order to ever be able to sell wholesale, in order to honor the people that are carrying our shoes, that we also have a suggested retail price that's around that area. So compared to these bigger companies, like I mentioned, like Cole Haan and Johnson & Murphy, our profit margins are not very high. But like I said, I think that there's a counterculture movement going on that's not worrying so much about efficiency or the bottom line at the end of the day. And was there one more? I think yes, 3.
How do you choose?
Great question. Yeah. Okay, sorry. That was pretty difficult. I, at the time, was working full-time in microfinance, and so I'd leave at the end of the day and immediately go out and start meeting with these shoemakers. And I visited a total of about 40 shops in this city that really range for so many different reasons. But I think I touched on this briefly earlier. We choose the shops based on their needs. So how are they doing? Are they selling a lot of shoes? They're selling tons of shoes, then maybe they don't want to work with us, or they don't have time, or that above all that we could help someone else that's not selling many shoes. So need-based. Secondly, quality. We went into some shops that were definitely in need, but there was just a lot of training that needed to take place in order for them to really get to a point where we felt like we could build a brand around them, which that is something that we didn't kind of quit on them and leave. We hope to one day be able to build those steps to be able to do that type of training to get them to that level. And then also, like I said, the sense of community, the way that they related to us, were they very trusting. I mean, think about it. I was the only one going to knock on this door in this rough neighborhood in Peru, and I'm probably not speaking the best Spanish, and they're sitting there telling me, I'm sitting there telling them, I'm going to take your shoes and go build a brand in the United States, and it's going to grow a lot. And so I know that that right now it's not a lot of shoes, but it will be in the future, so I want you to take a lot of time to help me develop. There's a lot of trust there, so it also had to do a lot with building those relationships and a lot of time in and out of their homes and spending time with their families.
Yes, Steve?
He looks like he's going to ask a hard one.
How can we buy knee solo shoes?
Thank you. That's pretty easy. Yeah, like I said, no matter where you are in life, you can contribute to this movement, not only of Knee Solo, but it's important that we all begin to consume in a responsible manner, in a way that, and to recognize that more companies, there should be 100 Knee Solos. We're not trying to be the brand that addresses this. We want there to be 100 Knee Solos. We want to work with companies that are doing similar things so that we can get the articles that we have on right now, but know that where they came from, and reconnect that human connection of, I know that this suit or these shoes were made in a place where a job was needed, and that I'm having an impact through my purchase, and that my purchase is contributing to education and change. But that was, again, going a very long answer to a short question. But you can go, if you want to buy shoes, first you can go to the reception right after this. We bring all of them in a trailer because we realize sizing is a little bit difficult, and it's not quite like going to Trunk Show and trying on jeans and saying I want those, which I've learned a lot about. But you can go to www.nisoloshoes, shoes.com, and we have an e-commerce website where you can buy there. And you can also check out our Facebook page, facebook.com/NeSoloShoes. This is a promotional ad. But in addition, we're looking for retail stores. We've had several come to us and say, I've got a retail store, I really want to carry your shoes, and we're getting there, which is so exciting. So if you know of retail stores that would be interested, or if you own them yourselves, let us know, because that's something that in January and February we're really going to start taking steps towards, is that's really where volume comes in and where our impact will be the greatest.
Well, you can see by this presentation why the University of Mississippi, the Chancellor and the Dean of Students recommended that Patrick Woodyard come to the Clinton School. Obviously, he's made not only Arkansas proud and Mississippi proud, but his work is a real testament to what young people can do. And we're trying to do that at the Clinton School. And Patrick, you've been a great inspiration tonight